Jacob Trouba says that this is the final chance for this core group of Rangers to win the Stanley Cup. Is that true?
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blueshirts fans, to episode number 1143 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. So I want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So we got a lot to do here today. This is the first day of on-ice Ranger practice for the 2024-2025 season. We'll be breaking down everything that happened there. You know, any highlights from practice that were notable. We got our first line combinations of the season. I'm sure a lot of people are looking forward to that. And also some comments from Peter Laviolette from his presser that he did yesterday, or his meeting with the media. But we're going to start today with somebody that's been in the headlines, for the Rangers. Really, I mean, honestly, we could go back toward the end of the regular season, certainly the postseason, due to his play, and then also the offseason, all the trade rumors and everything. And that would, of course, be Captain Jacob Trouba. And we will, in just a second, get to some of the drama. He addressed that. He talked to the media, talked about the trade rumors and everything that went down there, and whether fences had to be mended or not. But honestly, I found this a lot more interesting. That this was kind of the meat and potatoes of the Jacob Trouba media session. I mentioned it just a second ago during our intro here. He said, and I'll just give you the whole quote here, and you guys can make of it what you will, and I'll, of course, have my thoughts on it as well. In all likelihood, this will probably be the last crack for this core. I don't think it's a secret by any means. And he's talking, obviously, about the core group of Ranger players and his belief that this is going to be their final chance to win a Stanley Cup together. I can see where a case can be made there, but when you dig a little deeper, I don't really agree with it, at all. The clock is definitely ticking. At a certain point, these groups, whether it's the Rangers or any other team, they do start to age out a little bit. And then you get into a situation whether you're the Rangers or anybody else, do we keep the band together, for one more run? Do we push forward with this group that we have? Do we give them one more chance to win the Stanley Cup? Or do we start trading some of these players to rebuild a little bit? And maybe in the Rangers case, you could rebuild on the fly. I just don't think that we're there yet. And I understand why Trouba said this. He is still the Ranger team captain overall. I'm sure that to a degree, he wants to instill a sense of urgency in this group of Ranger players right off the bat here, because, sooner or later, you do run out of, wait till next year. And I'm sure he wants to make it clear to them, the Ranger players, that, this is the year to do it. This is the year to get it done. This is the year to cross the finish line. That should be the mentality going into the season. They've been among the NHL elite for 3 straight seasons. 2 of those 3 years have made it to the Eastern Conference final, and each time gotten within 2 wins of the Stanley Cup, but they haven't won the big one yet. And Trouba, I think, is trying to create a sense of urgency in his teammates that, it's time to get it done. One thing that I'll say here, though, and why I don't believe that this is going to be the final chance for this core group of players, there's a couple of reasons. But first and foremost, let's start with the age. You do see Ranger fans on social media. These are the eternal pessimists, and I get it. One Stanley Cup in 84 years, it'll do that to you from time to time. But let's look at this logically, okay? Let's just look at the most basic thing we can look at, and that is the average age of the players on this team. And this is a stat that, I screenshotted it in my phone because I knew I was going to go back to it sooner or later. It's kind of just waiting for the right time. And basically, there's a account on Twitter at NHL_rosters. And this individual basically just projected every team's opening night roster and took the average age from every single roster in the NHL. Now, again, all 32 teams ranked from youngest to oldest. Based on what this individual projects, will be the players on the opening night roster. Guess where the Rangers rank in terms of youngest or oldest? I'll give you a second to think about it. Get a number in your head. The Rangers right now, per this Twitter account, it is just one person, but per this Twitter account, looking at what he believes the opening night roster will be, the Rangers are projected to have the 9th youngest roster in the NHL. This idea that this team is old and they're over the hill and they're slow and everything else that people throw out there, it's just factually not true. And for those reasons, I believe, that the window will stay open beyond this year. I think that, the sooner you can win a Stanley Cup, obviously the better. And again, you can't always just assume that you'll have another chance the following season. But again, right now, 9th youngest roster in the NHL with an average age of 27.5 years old. To take this one step further, again, 9th youngest roster in the league. Let's look at only the 16 playoff teams last year. The teams that the Rangers will probably be competing with. And of course, this year, a couple teams will fall out of the playoffs. A couple of teams will get in. We know that. But let's look at the teams that were in the better half of the league last year, the 16 playoff teams. Of those 16 playoff teams, again, take a guess where you think the Rangers rank in terms of their average age on the roster. You got an idea? 1 through 16, where do you think they were? Second. They were the second youngest team in the NHL, going into this year, what's projected for the roster this year of all the 16 playoff teams from last year. Only the Bruins at 27.1 years old average were younger than the Rangers, or will be younger than the Rangers going into this season. So, look, you can make a case for that was their best shot last year and they might never get back. You might be absolutely right. But this idea that the window's closed now or it'll be closed after next year, I don't see that either. You can also just look at the way that the roster is shaped right now. You look at upcoming UFAs. Let's just roll with it for a second. This is the Rangers' last shot at it. Well, that means there's a bunch of people that are going to be leaving, right? You saw like what the Carolina Hurricanes went through this offseason. They had about 1 million free agents. A bunch of them left. Let's look at the Ranger UFAs. The only UFAs that the Rangers have next year that I think you could really consider part of the Ranger core are Igor Shesterkin and Ryan Lindgren. There's other UFAs, but you look at guys like Smith, Vesey, Ruido, Quick. I'm not going to call any of them like members of the Ranger core. They're all solid players and they all bring things to the table. I don't see any of them as the Ranger core. So you got two. You got two UFAs next year from what is truly this Ranger core. And I believe Igor Shesterkin will be back next year. Ryan Lindgren, I'm not so sure. He might be on his way, but it could be worse than that. And I love Ryan Lindgren, one of my favorite players on the team. But teams are going to lose free agents from one year to the next. And I just don't know that you can look at this and feel like, the entire core is going to be leaving and they will have missed their window if they don't win it this upcoming season. You want to look at RFAs? We can do that too. There are a few more RFAs that I would consider part of the Ranger core. You could say Lafreniere, K'Andre Miller. Even though this player, Kaapo Kakko, has fallen short of expectations, I would by this point include him as part of this core and part of this winning, atmosphere that the Rangers have created. I guess you could throw Zach Jones in there. He's an RFA next year, but he's never even really been a regular in the lineup. So even that might be a little bit of a stretch. But then you look at the core guys. To me, the core is largely intact and will be in most cases for many years. Now, Panarin will have just one more year after this upcoming season. Kreider's still going to be under contract for another 2 years. Mika, several more years. Vincent Trocheck's going to be here forever. He's, I feel like, become a core player in just a short amount of time here, just the 2 seasons that he spent here. Filipino will still be under contract. Same with Adam Fox. Same with Braden Schneider, if we can call Schneider a core player, which at this point I believe we can. He's been a part of, a lot of winning here. And even Jacob Trouba himself. I mean, look, I don't think Jacob Trouba is going to be on this roster after this upcoming season. One way or another, they're going to have to move on. And it goes back to the reason that we've mentioned several times on here. You've got a lot of guys that need new contracts next season. Most notably, Igor Shesterkin and Alexis Lafreniere. But yeah, I mean, you look at the core is there. The core is still intact. And again, you do want some urgency. You certainly want to see this team win it this year. But the idea that like the Rangers might fall off a cliff or it's their complete last chance, I don't see that either. I hesitate to even bring this up because the last time that we like really dove into detail on a Larry Brooks article, it was messy. And it was an article that was just very like open to interpretation, just very vague, just very confusing. But Larry Brooks today with an article did double or triple down on his report that Jacob Trouba would have refused, because we're getting back to Trouba here, would have refused a trade to a team, even one that was not on his 15-team no move list. Now, again, take this with a huge grain of salt because, there were some holes in Brooks's story last year. I will just say about this, if this is true, and again, it's a big if, but if this is true, like that's not right that Jacob Trouba would do that. He has every right to use the 15 teams that are part of his no move clause, submit that list to the Rangers and say, okay, I'm not going to any of these teams, but his contract says it's only a 15-team no move clause. So for him to put that in the air and tell all these teams he won't report if he's traded to them, that's not okay either. And again, I don't know 100% that that's accurate, Let me make that clear right here, right now. But if that was the case, that's not okay. You can't sabotage trades when they're teams that are not on your no move clause. But yeah, I mean, it is interesting, all the Trouba stuff. He did address some of the drama from this offseason. He was kind of on the generic side, but that's to be expected. He was asked what he made of the summer trade rumors that he was obviously involved in. That's what he had to say about it. Not a whole lot, a lot of words, but good communication with the organization throughout. Don't have much to tell or comment on. There's a lot of things that were said and snowballed. I'm excited to be here. And also went on to say, I want to stay here. I want to be here. I like living here. I love New York. My family loves it here, as everybody is now aware. He also was asked about, again, the speculation that the Rangers were going to trade him this offseason. He did kind of, I guess, indirectly, he never mentioned Larry Brooks by name, but it sounds like this is a little bit of a pot shot here. This is what Trouba had to say. People just run with random things. I'd love to find someone to verify a source. That would be nice, but that's not the standard, I guess, in media. So we'll leave it with that. And he went on to say that he would love for anyone who finds out where the rumors came from to let him know. So we'll see. We'll see if anybody approaches Jacob Trouba with that information. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much where things stand. He also mentioned that, there were no hurt feelings. There were no fences that need to be mended. We don't know 100% whether that's true or not. But again, it makes sense that Trouba would come in here, want to try to put out the fire. And it certainly sounds like he's going to be here for this upcoming season, will remain the New York Ranger captain. So going to continue talking about some other things here. Want to get to the first practice, some highlights from the first practice, a couple of talking points to come out of the first practice. We will do all of that in just a second, including line combinations. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even faster and even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great sites so that you don't have to waste time searching through thousands and thousands of tickets. You've got Gametime Picks. Creation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. You've also got all-in pricing. Toggling this feature shows the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. You've also got seat views. Get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. The lowest ticket price guarantee will happen, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. And you've also got Gametime ticket coverage. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? It is Gametime. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers. Huge shout out to the everydayers. As always sticking with this podcast. I don't know if I mentioned this, but we are back to 5 days a week now. We get that brief little period in the offseason where it's 3 episodes per week. It's now going to be 5 episodes per week for about the next 10 and a half months, and we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But yeah, for the everydayers, I think we're going to do one more preseason episode before the first preseason game. We'll sneak in one more episode there. The first preseason game, for anybody that needs a refresher, this Sunday at the Boston Bruins at 5 p.m. Cannot wait for that. The next episode will likely feature the best and worst case scenarios for Adam Fox. We're going through the entire roster. We're moving on to the defensemen, and Adam Fox is the next man up. But for right now, let's go ahead and shift our attention to just everything that happened at practice here today. We got line combinations, defense pairings, a couple of highlights here and there, and some interesting quotes as well. Let's start with the line combinations, right? I know everybody's up for this. I'm sure all of you, right along with me, ready to overreact to everything that happens as far as line combinations and defense pairings in the first practice. But this is what they had. First line, it was, as I and a lot of you, I'm sure, expected, left to right, Kreider, Zibanejad, Riley Smith. And for the record here, I know some people are going to fight me on this and say, well, the Panarin line's the first line. Yeah, it is. They were the best line for the Rangers last year. No one will dispute that. But the Rangers are still listing this as their top line. So we're going to call it as such going forward. That's your top line. They, scored a goal. And, again, it's just during drills. Take it with a grain of salt. It's not, the end-all, be-all. But there was some nice passing on this play. They were out there working against Zach Jones and Braden Schneider, and Igor Shesterkin was in net. Good passing all around, and Mika was able to bury a rebound after Igor had denied a shot by Chris Kreider. Riley Smith, he was talking with the media after this practice was over, and obviously he's going to be a very important part of this Ranger team for this upcoming season. He is the biggest get that the Rangers got in all of the offseason here. I was going to say free agent acquisition, but he, of course, was acquired in a trade. But this is what he had to say as far as the role that he envisions for himself with the Rangers. I think my role is contingent on how I play, and it can be ever expanding with what I bring to the table. Today's day one. You try to put your best product on the ice and try to mesh with guys as quickly as possible. And yeah, here's hoping that Riley Smith really kind of hits the ground with Mika and Kreider, hits the ground running, and just continues to, play his brand of hockey. He is a high motor player and somebody that, I think does improve this team. I know there's other players. I've said it myself on here. There's other players I would have preferred on a one-year deal more so than Riley Smith. But the very simple truth is that I do think that Riley Smith makes this team better. And I do think he's a better option to play with Mika and Kreider than anybody that we saw during that whole, revolving door for the entire season last year. The entire season, the entire postseason, they never really settled on a guy. But the Rangers got eliminated in Game 6, they put Alex Wenberg there. Now, Wenberg was fine for like a third-line center, but that's where they were at. They were so just like hands up in the air. We don't know who to put there. Let's just throw Alex Wenberg out there with them and see what happens. I think Riley Smith can at least bring some stability, and I think it's good that he's going to get the first shot with Kreider and Mika because everybody else got their chance last year. Riley Smith is new here. He should get the first opportunity and probably is the best player for that role. Second line, no surprises in the slightest here. You got left to right, Panarin, Trocheck, and Lafreniere. This line was so good last year, among the absolute best in the NHL. And my attitude has been, and will probably continue to be, at least for the foreseeable future, that these three were so good, there's no reason to split them up. You can always make you can always present the case to splitting them up because we want to get more out of these guys and more out of these guys. When you play as well as these three did together last year, then the onus is on everybody else to figure it out with everybody else. I don't want to see Lafreniere being moved up with, Mika and Kreider, and then Kakko is with Panarin and Trocheck. No, keep this line intact. They earned it. They deserve to be together to start the upcoming season. Third line, again, pretty much what we expected. Left to right, Will Cooley, Philip Hedl, and Kaapo Kakko. Kakko, I would say, is probably the next man up. If things don't click with Riley Smith and Mika and Kreider, you probably go to Kakko next. But I want to see Riley Smith get a decent amount of rope with that pairing this upcoming season. Philip Hedl, it's just great to see him back. And like we said in our most recent episode, sounds like all systems are go for Philip Hedl going into this upcoming season. Fourth line, this was interesting. Left to right, Vesey, Carrick, and Brodzinski. I had Matt Rempe probably starring there at the beginning of the season, but there are actually some reasons. Rempe did not practice with this group. Most of the regulars were in Group 2 at this practice. Matt Rempe was out there with Group 1, and I'll elaborate on that in just a couple of minutes here. Could also be a case with Brodzinski of the veteran getting the nod. He's the guy. He's in his 30s and been around quite a bit and played well for the Rangers the little that he played last year. Actually, decent amount that he played last year. Defense pairings. You've got Ryan Lindgren and Adam Fox. No surprises there. I'm all for keeping those two together. I know every now and then we throw out the idea of Miller with Fox. I don't really think that that's necessary. These two have very much played well together over the last handful of seasons, pretty much ever since they both came into the league. Then you had to start practice, and that's key. To start practice, Keandre Miller with Braden Schneider. Braden Schneider was in the top 4. Jacob Trouba was not. Reportedly, though, not too long into the practice, those two flip-flopped, and we had Trouba with Miller, and then Braden Schneider moved down to the third pairing alongside Zach Jones. Apparently, for what it's worth, Zach Jones had a very impressive-looking goal during this practice as well. My vote, I would say, is probably for Schneider to open the season with Miller. I just feel like he outplayed Trouba last year. I think it's as simple as that. And on top of that, I think Miller clicked better with Schneider last year than he did with Jacob Trouba. Miller's best hockey last season came when he was out there with Braden Schneider. So I would stick with those two as the second pairing. As we talked about, though, entirely possible that the Rangers, give their captain the benefit of the doubt. They give him an opportunity to kind of reclaim his role, and they throw him out there with Keandre Miller, at least to start the season. But we all know, if things falter with Trouba and if Schneider plays well, Laviolette's not going to hesitate. He'll make the tough decisions, and he will pull the trigger on flip-flopping the two of them if he feels like he needs to. But Laviolette also mentioned, and we'll get into his quotes a little bit later, that things are very fluid right now, and they're going to be looking at a bunch of things throughout the entire training camp here. Also with this group, you had Edstrom, Othman, Ruhwedel, and Robertson. They were all getting some work as well. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much what we expected. The only somewhat surprise to me again was Johnny Brodzinski on the fourth line instead of Matt Rempe. But as I mentioned just a second ago, there is a reason for that, and I gotta thank Vince Mercogliano for sending out this tweet. This is what he had to say when I think somebody asked him why isn't Rempe with this group? This is Mercogliano's tweet. He doesn't have enough NHL games to be eligible for early testing and didn't want to do it with the rookies last week either, which kind of left him in no man's land, which is a little odd, but that's pretty much the long and short of the reason why Rempe was not out there with the normal regulars, and some other notable players obviously were. But Rempe apparently did great during his session. He was out there in Group 1. He was finishing first in a lot of the straight line drills, so that's great to see. Rempe also talked about how he's basically worked on everything, his skating, his speed, et cetera, et cetera. This is cool too. Rempe also mentioned, and I think a lot of us knew this, but Rempe was living with Jonathan Quick and his family in Connecticut for a good chunk of the summer there, and apparently was catching frogs with Jonathan Quick's kids. He also mentioned that Quick's youngest child, I guess he's 4 years old, he tries to fight Rempe on occasion, so that's pretty funny. And Rempe also referred to himself as Quick's oldest kid, so good stuff all around, good wholesome stuff. And while he was in Connecticut, Rempe was also training with Chris Kreider as well for a good chunk of the offseason. So just good stuff. You like to hear it. And Rempe, obviously, working on his craft, not content to just go out there and be a goon. And I do think he's very much capable of being more than that. I don't think he's ever going to be like a point per game player, right? But he's got more to offer than just going out there and throwing punches. I do believe that. And we'll see if he can, take the next steps in his career this upcoming season. Going to keep everything rolling in just a second. I want to shift our attention to Peter Laviolette. He met with the media since the last time we did an episode here, since the last time we all spoke, and had some interesting things to say. Some of it is just coach talk, but there were some interesting takeaways as well. And we will get to all that in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. You have heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with the YouTube TV base plan, you will be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. Just visit FanDuel.com to download America's #1 sports book. All right, let's go ahead and close out today's episode, like I said, by talking a little bit about some of Pierre Laviolette's more interesting quotes from his presser that he did just the other day. He was asked about Riley Smith, and I think a lot of eyes throughout the preseason, really into the season in general, a lot of eyes are going to be on Riley Smith because, like I said, he was the biggest get for the Rangers this offseason in terms of bringing in somebody from another team. And I think a lot of people are hoping that he can mesh well with Mika and Kreider. I know I for sure am. Lavi had this to say about Riley Smith: proven to be successful and a winner. He also went on to mention that Smith will get a look at top-line right wing, but then he went on to say that he doesn't want to box people in or box people out. Also mentioned, again, and this is kind of a theme with Peter Laviolette. It was a theme last year, it's a theme this year, and I love it. They're going to be taking a look at a lot of different things. So, yeah, Riley Smith, again, I still like him to start the season. That's my prediction, and that's my preference. I think that he will start the season with Mika and Kreider, and if it's up to me, which it's not, they haven't asked me for my input, believe it or not, but Riley Smith, if it were up to me making the decisions, yeah, he would be out there with Mika and Kreider to start the season. So it's good to know that, Peter Laviolette seems to think highly of him. He also, Laviolette, talked about, competition and the idea that there aren't really a lot of spots open because they do bring back just a boatload of players from last season's roster. So, yeah, I mean, there's not like a ton of competition when you first look at it, but this is what Pierre Laviolette had to say, about that notion. There's always room inside of training camp. There's always an opportunity for you to jump out of your shoes, knock us on the head, and say, I am here. And that's good to hear. There's because there's somebody this year will very likely end up playing more games for the Rangers than we thought they were ever going to play, and will end up having a lot more success than we ever thought that they were going to have. I think, Matt Rempe is somebody that you can look at last year. And I know Rempe has his detractors, and people are probably going to roll their eyes if they don't like Rempe, and they're going to say, oh, the guy plays, 5 minutes a night. All he does is fight, blah, blah, blah. But the bottom line, Matt Rempe ended up, whether you like him or not, Matt Rempe ended up having a much bigger role for this team than a lot of us, very likely anticipated last season. I wasn't talking a whole lot about Matt Rempe during last offseason. That player is probably out there somewhere. There's probably a player that is a little bit under the radar for the Rangers right now and might end up, playing a bigger role. I think 2 years ago, another good example would have been, I could give you two from 2 years ago. The two guys that were on a PTO, Jimmy Vesey, Ben Harper, not superstar players. Both of them ended up playing a much bigger role for that Ranger team than we ever thought that they would play. So yeah, that's kind of where things stand there. And very curious, we'll see which prospect surprises us this year and who ends up carving out, a bigger role for themselves on this team than maybe we were expecting. Laviolette was also asked about Kaapo Kakko, another player that I think a lot of us are going to be watching very closely. Again, throughout the entire, NHL calendar here, from right here the first day of practice until hopefully the final game of the Stanley Cup final with the Rangers holding the Stanley Cup over their head. But we're getting ahead of ourselves there. Laviolette said this about Kakko. He'll get an opportunity to play his game and take hold of what he wants to take hold of. And yeah, that's, again, it's mostly just coach talk, but I do like the idea that the door is still wide open for Kaapo Kakko, if he plays well enough, to claim a big role for himself on this team. And I've said this a couple of times, haven't mentioned it in a while, so I think it's worth bringing up here while we're talking about Kakko. I don't think there's a single player on this Ranger team, on this Ranger roster, that needs a strong start to not just the season, but I would say the preseason and training camp as well. He needs to hit the ground running and show that he's going to be, something resembling the player that the Rangers thought that they were drafting, a half decade ago at this point. If you tell me that there's any player on this Ranger team that could really use a fast start, a goal on opening night, maybe a couple of assists early, whatever it might be, just a way for the player to get involved, be noticeable, and contribute, hopefully, to some wins, it's Kaapo Kakko, because his rope is not going to last forever. This is year 6 for Kaapo Kakko, and as we've very well documented on here, and a lot of you are very well aware, the Rangers have some prospects coming along. Brandon Othman, Brett Berard. These guys are knocking on the door. Either one of them could make the team out of training camp. Outside shot that they both do. I don't think that'll happen, but don't rule it out. And they're going to be there. And yeah, I know that they both play left wing and Kaapo Kakko plays right wing, but there's always a way around that. Othman has dabbled on the right side. They had him there for a little while with Hartford last year. So yeah, Kakko's got to hit the ground running if he wants to carve out a big role for himself, and if he wants to be able to hold off some of these young guys that are, again, knocking on the door at this point. Laviolette was also asked about Matt Rempe. This is what he had to say. He put in a lot of work this summer. He had a big impact on our team last year. This is a young player that works tirelessly at his craft. Yeah, there was a quote from Rempe. I don't have it in front of me, but I guess Rempe has basically spent every single day of the summer, and this is not the only thing that he's doing, but he's spent every day of the summer working on straight line speed, just working on his skating and trying to build up his speed a little bit. So that's great to see. Laviolette was also asked about defense pairings. We talked about that just a couple of minutes ago, and Zach Jones, and whether Zach Jones will be, a fixture in this lineup basically for this upcoming season. Laviolette once again said that the defensive pairs will, change throughout camp, but that nothing is locked in. We saw that on full display at the first practice here. Braden Schneider starting with K'Andre Miller, although then he was eventually moved down to the third line or third pairing with Jones, while Jacob Trouba moved up with Miller. So very curious to see how that plays out. As for Zach Jones, Laviolette said that he is not locked in as the third left defenseman, but he did mention that Jones impressed them a lot last season. When he was in the lineup, he said he thought he played very well. Not too long ago, Laviolette talked about Zach Jones and mentioned that he was impressed by the fact that Jones was in and out of the lineup so often last year, but it seemed like anytime he had to go back out there, he was ready to go, and you thought he would have been playing all along. I think Zach Jones is going to have a nice season, and this is playing out basically how I figured that it probably would. Zach Jones pretty clearly has the inside track to that sixth defenseman role, but they're not going to come out and say that. The Ranger coaching staff, Laviolette, they're not just going to say, yep, he's our sixth defenseman, he's ready to go for opening night. They're going to make him earn it the way they make everybody earn everything. And, I don't see a situation where it's not going to be Zach Jones. Are they really going to, replace him with a veteran journeyman, Connor Mackey, Ben Harper, Brandon Scanlon? That seems very unlikely. And Jones, I feel for him because he's been in and out of the lineup for several seasons now. I feel like he's mostly played well when he's been out there, especially this past season. The door is finally wide open. I just can't see them pulling the rug out from under him going into this upcoming season just to put like a career journeyman there or like put Chad Ruedel there. I just don't think that it's going to play out that way. I think Zach Jones is going to be your guy on opening night. I think he finally will and finally should have a decent amount of leash as far as, what he wants to do in terms of claiming the position there. I don't think Jones should be looking out of his shoulder and coming out of the lineup as a healthy scratch for like game 3. I think it's finally time to give him some run and see what the kid can do. Also, want to mention right now that we are going to do our best to turn the page on the Jacob Trouba drama. It's been a long off season of it. We talked about it a good amount here today. Jacob Trouba obviously met with the media, certainly had to discuss that. But I think it is time to move on now. And, I know that Trouba certainly has his fans. He certainly has his detractors. There's a lot of them in the YouTube comment section, as I've noticed over the last handful of days here. But we are going to turn our page for the most part. But we got one more quote here from Peter Laviolette on the entire Jacob Trouba situation. Whatever gets said on the outside gets said on the outside. I don't get too involved with that. I have a great relationship with Jacob. I thought Jacob was a really good captain for us last year. Nothing changes. We had conversations more about the upcoming season. So yeah, Jacob Trouba, I think at this point, and I never expected that this would change anyway, but at this point, you can pencil in Jacob Trouba as the New York Ranger captain for 2024-2025. And that part, I'm completely fine with. I had issue with how Trouba played last year in the postseason. His role as the captain, though, it does feel like, he has the attention of that locker room. He has the respect of that locker room. And a lot of players, are going to follow whatever he says. So as far as him being the captain, if he's on the roster, no issues with that whatsoever. Figure we could pretty much call it there. Did just want to mention, though, that anybody that has an overtime story from last year's playoff run, definitely send them my way. We've done this a couple of times in the past. What we're going to do this offseason is go ahead, email me your stories from where you were, what you were doing, who you were with, when the Rangers won one of their playoff overtime games. Send it my way. I'm going to read your responses on a future episode of Locked On New York Rangers, likely right before the season starts, just to get us all fired up and ready for some Ranger hockey. But figure we could pretty much call it there for today. If you guys would like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, there's lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, @LO_NY_Rangers. Once again, there's @LO_NY_Rangers. And definitely subscribe to the Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.